They said the desert remembered every footstep, every sorrow spilled into its dust, and when the wind swept across the town of Dry Creek, it carried more than grit. It carried whispers of debts and bargains, of promises broken beneath the sun. On that day when the sky was the color of worn brass and the air stung the skin, the people of the town watched as Evelyn Harper walked the dirt road with her chin lifted, though her heart trembled beneath her breast. 24 years had shaped her into something both fragile and fierce, like a wildflower that had pushed its way through rock. Her dress, pale blue, but faded with years of wear, fluttered in the restless wind, and her eyes, gray as a storm caught between breaking and holding, betrayed no tear, though the ache inside her was heavy as stone. Her family had been decent folk once. Her father, a rancher of modest means, had fallen behind after a cruel winter stripped the land bare and sickness swept through the cattle. Creditors pressed. The settler who held their note pressed harder still, and in the end the price came not in coin, but in blood of kin. To clear the debt, they gave her away. No words of comfort softened the blow. No promise of return accompanied the decision. Her mother turned her face, unable to bear the shame, while her father kept his eyes on the ground, his jaw set like granite. Evelyn did not beg, for she had learned long ago that pleading in this world seldom changed men's minds. The man who came to claim her was Clint Rowdy, known in every corner of the county not for kindness, but for a temper that bit quick as a rattlesnake. He was 32, shoulders broad from years of hard riding, eyes sharp as glass shards, and a mouth set in lines that had forgotten laughter. Folks said he had lost more than cattle, family too, and that bitterness had carved its home inside him where gentleness should have lived. When he strode into town, boots striking the earth like gunfire, folks stepped aside not from respect but fear. That was the man her family delivered her to, as if she were another mule in a transaction. He seized her wrist in a grip rough enough to leave bruises and dragged her through the main street. The townsfolk peered from behind shutters, from porches, from the shadows of wooden awnings, but none stepped forward. Dust rose around them, the sound of her shoes scraping against hard ground mingling with the steady clink of his spurs. Someone muttered that the Harpers had no choice, that debt was debt, but the words rang hollow even as they faded. Evelyn walked with her spine unbent, though her wrist burned under his hand. She whispered inside herself that she was not broken, not yet, not now. His ranch lay west of town, a sprawl of land browned by sun and neglect. The house stood with paint peeled and shutters sagging, its windows dark as hollow eyes. Clint shoved the door open, its hinges creaking in complaint, and pushed her inside. The air smelled of stale whiskey and dust. A chair sat crooked by the hearth, a bottle abandoned at its feet, and the silence pressed down like a shroud. He let go of her wrist and tossed his hat onto the table. "You'll sleep in the small room," he said, his voice gravel thickened by drink and smoke. "Do what needs doing, cook, sweep, tend the fire. Don't expect thanks." She nodded once, refusing to bow her head, though his words stung. She carried herself through the cabin with a grace born of determination, setting her small belongings on the narrow cot in the side room. That night she lay awake listening to his heavy boots crossing the floorboards, his mutters as he poured another drink, the slam of the bottle on wood. She closed her eyes against the noise and dreamed of rivers, of meadows untouched by debt or duty, though morning light brought her back to dust and silence. Days bled into one another. Clint spoke little, and when he did, it was sharp, as if every syllable cost him patience. He spent his hours riding fence lines, cursing at cattle, coming back with the stink of sweat and liquor. At meals he ate without looking at her, his fork scraping harshly against the tin plate. Evelyn moved quietly through the house, keeping it from collapsing into ruin, cooking what little she could from scant supplies, and never once hearing a word of gratitude. She felt like a ghost wandering through another's life. And yet, even ghosts are sometimes seen. It was at the well on a late afternoon that she first met James Caldwell. The sun dipped low, turning the horizon to fire, and she struggled with a bucket heavy with water, her fingers trembling from the strain. A shadow fell across her, and when she looked up, a man stood there taller than most, his frame steady as an oak rooted in earth. He was 35, with hair darkened by dust and sun, and eyes of a softer blue than she had ever known. He said nothing at first, only reached out to steady the bucket, his hand roughened by honest work yet careful not to brush her more than needed. She felt his gaze take her in, not in the way Clint looked at her, not in possession, but in recognition. He saw the tired lines beneath her eyes, the faint marks on her wrists, and though his lips did not speak pity, his silence carried it. "You're new here," he said finally, his voice deep but even, carrying the calm of a man who wasted no words. She inclined her head, wary yet grateful for the steadiness in his tone. "New enough." He nodded, lifting the bucket with ease and setting it on the ground beside her. "Caldwell Place is just yonder hill. If you need anything, call out. Wind carries sound far in these parts." He tipped his hat and walked away, his stride unhurried. She stood watching him vanish into the amber light, her heart oddly steadier than before, though she told herself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope had teeth. Still, she found herself waiting in small ways. When Clint returned with anger on his breath, she remembered the quiet strength of that man's eyes. When the house seemed too heavy with silence, she heard in memory the calm cadence of his voice. And when her hands ached from work, she thought of the ease with which he had lifted the bucket, as if even burdens were lighter in his grasp. Weeks passed, and fate wove their paths again. At market, she saw him trading feed. At church, he sat quietly in the back pew. At the well, he appeared once more. Each time his presence was the same, never pressing, never lingering longer than respect allowed, but offering something she had not felt in years. Safety. Clint noticed. Jealousy slithered into his veins, though he could not name its shape. He began to snap harsher at her, to accuse her eyes of wandering, though she had never once betrayed him. One night, drunk and raging, he slammed his fist against the table, the wood groaning under the blow. "Ungrateful," he spat, his words soaked in whiskey. "I took you in, paid your family's way. And you look at another like I'm nothing." Evelyn stood by the fire, her hands clasped tight, her body trembling, but her voice steady. "You never wanted me, Clint. You only wanted what was owed." His face twisted, and for a breath she thought his hand might rise, but instead he stormed out, the door slamming so hard it rattled the walls. Alone by the flames, tears finally slipped down her cheeks. She wept not only for her pain, but for the years of her life bartered like cattle. Word traveled swift in towns, where news was the only entertainment. Whispers of Clint's cruelty reached James Caldwell, and something inside him, long buried beneath grief, surged forward. He saddled his horse before dawn and rode hard toward Clint's ranch, dust rising in his wake. The morning air bit cold, but his heart burned hot. He dismounted in the yard, boots crunching over dirt, and when Clint emerged bleary-eyed from a night of drink, James's voice rang steady as iron. "Let her go, Rowdy. She's not your debt to own." Clint sneered, spitting into the dust. "You want her, Caldwell? Take her. But don't fool yourself. She's nothing but trouble, same as every woman." James's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze to Evelyn, standing in the doorway with fear and hope colliding in her chest. His voice softened, though it carried through the air with fierce clarity. "You're the only love I have." The words fell like thunder over dry earth. Time seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to drink them in, as if they were water after years of drought. Clint's face darkened, his fists clenching, but before he could move, Evelyn stepped forward. "I choose," she said, her voice trembling yet resolute. She moved past Clint, past the years of silence and fear, until she stood before James. His hand waited, not pulling, not commanding, only open. She placed her hand into his, and for the first time in her life, she felt free. Clint's rage burned, but he saw the fire in her eyes and the unshakable steadiness in James's stance. He knew the fight was lost before it began. With a curse, he turned and stormed away, the sound of his boots fading into emptiness. Evelyn stood in the yard, the wind lifting her hair, dust swirling around them. She looked up at James, and he looked back with eyes that promised no riches, no ease, only a love steady enough to weather storms. She did not need more. Together they walked toward the waiting horizon, leaving behind the house of anger and stepping into a life not of debt, but of choice. In that wide desert, where footsteps fade quick and whispers are swallowed by wind, their story carved itself into memory. Not because it was grand or filled with gunfire, but because it was simple, true, and steady. She was not a debt. She was not a burden. She was the only love he had. And that was enough to build a home that no storm could break.